Okay, well, 10 seconds, maybe less. Anyway, welcome to week 6. It's just flying by. I'm figuring out how to do the midterm, whether I want to do that online or in real time or a combination of both. So either way, the equivalent will be take-home open book, one way or the other. Maybe give you, well, I'll see how it works out. Still learning the technology, because I didn't really trust the technology from before. This is usually the one of the parts, assuming the rest of it hasn't been that difficult. Sometimes we have shown movies. The one part of the reason for doing this class was starting way before slavery, like 12,000 years before slavery here in America, and then doing a slave's eye view of it, and by showing movies. Since I hadn't gotten permission to show the movies from the film directors, and the films themselves are fairly graphic, I'll just refer you to them, and you can either get them on Netflix, or I can get a dub, and we can rent a room here to show them after class. But there's a couple of films that cover the material we'll be going over today that are fairly intense. They are called Colombo and Sankofa. Let's see here. All right, it'll be like that. Be like that. Colombo is Brazilian film. So it's in Portuguese with English subtitles. And it actually played here in Eugene in the mid-'80s when the Bijou was in the Center building. So it played in America as kind of an art film. So a Colombo is is mostly about the story of Palmares, which is a maroon republic. So named because in order to have a republic, you have to defend yourself against people that are attacking you. And so Palmares was actually maintained for close to a century. It was made up of, it was actually the first republic that wasn't a native nation. So everything else was colonies. It was made up of escaped slaves, natives, and other folks in the jungles in Brazil. And so they had to defend themselves militarily against Dutch and Portuguese soldiers and maintain their freedom for close to a century. And Colombo became a generic term for many such maroon communities that exist in South America. So Colombo is one film, and actually you can even get it on Amazon, at least buy the DVD. Also Sankofa, by Haile Gerame. I believe that's how you spell it, Sankofa. Sankofa is a maroon's eye view of slavery. And it's kind of a mystic in that it it basically starts out with, there are a number of slave forts, and I'm going to show you pictures from my trip to Africa last year to one of those slave forts. The slave fort that's in Sankofa is Gore Island in Senegal. And it has this African-American woman basically doing a photo shoot, kind of like a fashion photo shoot. So there's a white photographer, and she's black, but she's wearing a blonde, straight-haired wig. And he's saying, you know, give me sexy, give me this. And he's on the beach right outside the slave fort. And so there's this old man that comes, and he's playing the griot, and he's, you know, shaking his staff at her. You know, this is a holy place, this is a sacred place. You're profaning it, you know, go back and find your roots. And, you know, who are you, old man? So they restrain him. And then, so she comes back the next day, they're still doing a photo shoot, except they're doing a photo shoot now. She's wearing kente cloth and African clothes, and he's still coming up to her and saying, no, you need to go back to your roots. Go back to your roots, right? And so she freaks out, and they drag him away, and then she's going into, following the tour group into the dungeons, and all of a sudden she feels alone, and the tour group has left her behind, and then all of a sudden she sees this room full of people that are just staring at her, and they're all slaves. And then boom, she's transported back with them. And then the movie starts, you know, the movie has started there, but her journey basically goes to a plantation in the West Indies. No, you can't take me, you know, I'm not a slave, I'm American, I'm an American. No, they ain't hearing it. So she winds up on this plantation in the West Indies, and goes from there. So it's, you know, fairly intense, because you know, you see some scenes that are, you know, actually lifted from slavery days, from real life accounts. So to begin a look at how, so I'm not going to run the film during class like I have in previous terms, just because I'm trying something different. But I want to use a line, an essay from Alice Walker, which I'm not going to quote all of her, but I'm taking the title, Honoring the Difficult. So part of the irony of the land of the free, and I deliberately didn't capitalize that, being built on slavery, and also becoming and being the country that incarcerates more of its citizens than the most repressive regimes on earth, can't be ignored. It can't. And that is a fact. So the irony that slavery has also returned to our shores also cannot be ignored, but there is no liberation movement for those slaves. Though we benefit from them being free. So slavery has returned to American shores. You may not be aware of it, but it's here. Okay? And it's not individual families like it was back then. It's multinational corporations. Okay? So even with the prison industrial complex, as Angela Davis refers to it, which also includes the juvenile justice system, one can say it could never, you could also make the case that slavery never left. If you have a justice system particularly the juvenile justice system, which was imported directly from slavery. Same conditions. Okay, so not necessarily people committing crimes, but being incarcerated because of who they are and what they did. And so the justice system and the prison industrial complex, which basically, essentially one of the things that she's saying, or she and other writers, she being Angela Davis, is saying, look, these conditions are maintained because these people are operating call centers. They're making clothes. They're putting together electronic parts because you can pay them $1 or $2 a day because they're incarcerated. And companies can make a deal with them. So we have a first black president currently occupying the White House. The White House, which was built using slave labor, he's not a descendant of slaves and can only vicariously absorb the lessons of slavery, like an African American who was born here that has a living history of slavery. I mean, I was raised with that awareness. That even though it was kind of like, in a sense, a privilege to have free education, like I didn't think it was such a big deal to graduate high school. So what? That was easy. Well, I was quickly let known that, okay, you're the third person in our family to graduate high school, because everybody else wasn't allowed to do it, which that tripped me out, really. Boy, you are 3 generations out of sharecropping and 4 generations out of slavery. Yes, you could treat this like it's no big deal, but it is a big deal for us. And it's been the key to our freedom. Not just education in the public sector, but the education that you give to yourself to supplement what's given to you in the public sector. That's really critical. Not a lot of people can have that. Okay, they're talking about the girl who was in Pakistan shot in the head by the Taliban because she was learning to read. I mean, we have students here from countries like that who are getting their education because they would not be allowed to read anything other than their holy book, in this particular instance, the Quran, but it's also not limited to Islam either. So, part of the lessons of slavery is not that it happened to us, but that it could happen to you still. So, the president cannot speak directly on any length or to any depth on current manifestations of slavery and historic discrimination, though they affect him on a daily basis, and if they affect him, they affect us. So the basic economic principles that maintain slavery still exist to support our society today. So instead of individual families, we have multinationals maintaining a plantation-like atmosphere to supply us with products. So take for example, the iPhone and the iPad factories Foxconn runs in China. Now, one of the things that did not come out, I don't know how many of you watched the debates, all 3 of them? Okay. So one of the problems, and Steve Jobs had a meeting, or actually wrote an article to the president about why Apple had to export the manufacturing of the iPad and the iPhone to China. He said, yeah, the ideas came from here, but as an example, Foxconn, the company that Apple has manufactured their stuff, if you wanted to, like, I bought this 4S, at Best Buy for basically $200 with a 2-year contract. In order for it to cost me only $200, and it probably cost Apple less than $20 to make in materials. Okay? So where's the other $200 coming from? Everybody else getting their piece of the pie? How much went to the worker? Well, here's what happens. 300,000 people live in dorms in this factory. 4 or 5 to a room. They are paid basically $20 a day, US, for a 12-hour day. And so, for example, Jobs got an early prototype of the iPhone, put it in his pocket, and his car keys scratched the face. No, we can't have that. Redesign it now, because we got to launch this thing in, less than 2 weeks. So what Foxconn did is it got workers up at midnight, gave them tea and a biscuit, plus had 2,000 engineers on site to reprogram the machine so that the glass could fit in, harder glass, and the glass company had to be right next door, and it was, right? The company that makes the Gorilla Glass that faces the iPad and the iPhone, to cut that to the new size. So he said, and we started making iPhones inside of 12 hours. Several million of them. Now name me a place in the United States where you can even find 2,000 engineers. How many engineers is the United States graduating a year? That's a known figure, but it ain't 2,000. It's way less. He said, that's the problem. Some of these jobs ain't coming back. Because, we can create the ideas, but as far as executing it, how can you bring those manufacturing jobs to the U.S.? Because how many U.S. workers will work for 12 hours and get $20? Right? Won't happen. So we might consider a biscuit and cup of tea, and that's all you get to eat for 12 hours and you have to stay up? No, we ain't playing that. Slavery's over, right? We're the land of the free. Okay, so those are some of the economic realities. Now, we would call that slavery. I call that slavery even though they're getting paid, right? American workers wouldn't work like that. So part of what I'm saying, okay, land of the free, but 5% of the planet is consuming half of the planet's resources just to finance our lifestyle of having electricity, clean running water, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that to make you guilty. I'm just saying, look, not only is freedom not free, but it also comes at a price for other folks. So, and the president, whoever wins the election next Tuesday, is not necessarily going to be dealing with that reality. They're going to be dealing with, okay, we got to run this country here. So, those factories in China. So, this is, I shot this from outside, from the tour bus. I was with a group of largely African-American yogis from all over the country, and we did a yogic-related tour of Ghana, Togo, and Benin last August. This is Elmina Castle outside of Ghana. It's called Elmina because the pretext for the Portuguese who had made contact with the kings and the chiefs was originally to set up a building for a mine, because Ghana was rich in gold. For example, one particular king had a gold nugget big enough to tether his horse to. That's how much gold they had. So if you understand how big that would be, that's a substantial rock. Right? So, Elmina, meaning in Portuguese, the mine. But they weren't actually there for the gold. They're actually there for human gold. And it's a fort. And what you can't see in the mist is the other side of this bay, which is Cape Coast, which is another slave fort. So this slave fort was built basically by the Portuguese, and it's well defended because basically there would be people coming to raid you for your slaves or whatever. This is just on the entrance to your right as you enter the main route from the castle. You can see from the skull and crossbones, it's not necessarily, well, they're not pirates. This is the death room. Can't see it in this particular picture. This is the chapel. And the death room is basically right off to the right here, but it's definitely in sight of the chapel. Now, it's interesting to note from this form of Christianity, which is, we're still well into the Inquisition when this is happening, where the injunction has come down to subdue the non-Christian world, and Christian, again, at this point meant Europeans only, that you have a chapel in the middle of a fort that is essentially being used for human cargo. This is the inside of the death room, and it had been excavated. I'll show you a different angle of this, but I just want to show you now it's the bare rock floor, and then there's this kind of like green area. Well, that was the original floor. The bare rock floor, that's a better angle there. That had gotten excavated about 20 or 30 years ago to the bare rock floor. Now, originally people thought it was dirt, but actually it was compounded human feces. People were sent to this room to die. If you protested being in chains, if you made any trouble at all, you were sent to this room. This is the gate to the door of that room. And this is like what it looks like when that door is closed. Looking out. So that's pretty much the only source of light to the room. That's the source of ventilation. And that's when they let you out. So notice, the green part, that's not paint, that was excavated floor to bare rock. So essentially they put people in there to die. Hence that. Hence the skull and crossbones on the doorway. Now that was mostly male prisoners. This is the room where they kept female prisoners, female slaves. Now, remember, in Africa, there was no population that was just slaves. All slaves were captives of war. And there were nearly constant wars of some kind. And so you would actually, if it was within Africa, since slavery wasn't permanent, even if you were captured in war, you were actually supposed to be treated as if you were a tribal member within the tribe. Now, to the degree that, every chief that we talked to, that we went to on tour, they wanted us to forget slavery. In fact, they made a point of, forget about slavery. And, no, we ain't forgetting that. But, okay, it wasn't you, it wasn't you that we're talking to in 2011, but no, we're not forgetting that, sorry. Because if you weren't aware of what was going on, they claim that they weren't aware of what was going on. They thought that by selling us to Europeans or whatever, that we'd be treated the same, if they thought about it at all. Well, some of them didn't think about it. They figured, well, we'll march these slaves 3 times around this tree so that they forget where they came from so they won't come haunt us. So, yeah, there are many minds about it, and yeah, they feel bad somewhat. But, here we are. So, this particular room held up to 150 females. So if you can think about the women and children that were in this room, packing 150 folks into this room. And this is the part of the courtyard where you can't see it, but behind where people are standing, there's a large seawater cistern. Now, a cistern is basically a place where water is collected, and so the women slaves were washed off in seawater. There. And the governor of the fort lived in these quarters upstairs, and this is a room off the courtyard where there's a secret stairway to the governor's quarters. And this is a doorway with a trap door on the left closed, on the right open, that he would send the female slaves that he would pick from his vantage point on the balcony above where folks are looking. Above on the top, I didn't have a shot, I didn't include it here, but he's looking down, selecting female captives to have sex with them before they get shipped out. This is it's referred to as the door of no return. This is Elmina's door of no return. The women had a separate one and the men had a separate one. I believe this is the men's door of no return. At the time that this fort was built, the water actually came up to pretty close to the shore. You can't necessarily make this out. I have another shot that shows this, but the beach is like about 100 yards away. In the time that this was built, it like washed up. So in high tide, you basically just had a gangplank down to the rowboats where they rowed people out to load it onto the ships. This is the Voodoo Altar that is built to cover the door of no return for the men in Cape Coast Castle, which is on the other side of the bay from there. And all through this, you can actually see people have left like wreaths and other kinds of offerings for the ancestors. So when we talked about last week, 3 conditions in slavery. So mastery, slavery, maroonage. So when we talk about the slave trade, Euro-American chattel slavery. Chattel means, chattel rhymes with cattle. Chattel is a form of property and property right.